Growing up, I always knew I wasn't the favorite. My parents were way more focused on my younger sister, Emma. No matter how many mistakes she made, they always gave her endless chances and support. Meanwhile, I learned to rely on myself. I worked hard, got through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, and eventually landed a stable, well-paying job. Even though I did it all pretty much on my own, my parents never seemed all that impressed. For years, I told myself it didn't bother me and kept pushing forward, hoping that one day they'd see how independent I was and respect me for it. Emma's life, on the other hand, was all over the place. She got married young, but her first marriage ended after 2 years when her husband cheated. She remarried quickly and had 2 more kids, but that marriage fell apart too when her second husband developed a gambling problem and they lost their house. By the time I was building my career, Emma was on her 3rd marriage with 6 kids, ranging from 2 to 12 years old. Her current husband works part-time as a delivery driver and is trying to start his own business, but they're barely scraping by. My parents have always been there to rescue her, paying for things here and there and always finding reasons why she needed just a little more help. For a long time, I was too focused on my own life to get wrapped up in Emma's drama. But then I started noticing a shift in how my parents treated me. They became more attentive, reaching out more often, complimenting my career, and inviting me over for family dinners. I thought maybe they were finally proud of me. Part of me had been waiting for this for years, and I wanted to believe they were starting to see me differently. Last month, they invited me over for dinner. First, everything seemed normal. We talked about work and caught up on family stuff, and for a moment I actually felt like I belonged in a way I hadn't before. But then the conversation took a turn. They started talking about Emma, saying how tough it was for her to raise 6 kids on one income, how they'd done everything they could to help but were running out of money. They went on about how lucky I was to have a good job and a steady income, how I didn't have anyone depending on me, and that I was in a position to help out the family. Then they dropped the bombshell. They wanted me to step in and take over Emma's finances. They had it all planned out. First, they wanted me to buy her a new 5-bedroom house because her current place was too small for her family of 8. They wanted me to set up college funds for all 6 of her kids, saying it was only fair since I could afford it. On top of that, they wanted me to give her a monthly allowance of $5,000 to cover basics and even provide seed money for her to start a mommy blog business. Altogether, they were asking for around $2 million upfront, plus ongoing support. I was completely shocked. This wasn't just a small favor. They were asking me to take on a lifelong responsibility, basically turning me into Emma's personal bank. It hit me then that their recent kindness wasn't because they finally appreciated me as their son. It was because they saw me as a way to fund Emma's life. I told them I was willing to help with small things here and there or in emergencies, but I wasn't okay with taking on such a huge financial burden. That's when everything blew up. My mom started crying, saying I was turning my back on family when they needed me most, and my dad straight up called me selfish and ungrateful. They said I was showing my true colors and that they were disappointed in who I'd become. The dinner ended with them storming out. I thought that might be the end of it, but I was wrong. Within hours, Emma started blowing up my phone with texts, accusing me of ruining her kids' future. She even had her kids send me messages like, "Uncle doesn't love us anymore." It was too much, so I ended up blocking their numbers. I couldn't believe things had gotten this crazy just because I said no to funding my sister's entire life. The next day, my grandma, my dad's mom, called me out of nowhere. Turns out, my parents had been telling the whole family that I, their successful son, was going to take care of everything for Emma before they even talked to me about it. They made it sound like Emma was moving into a fancy new house, her money problems were over, and I was going to provide everything she needed. But now that I said no, they're totally embarrassed because the family expected me to step up based on their big promises. When my grandparents heard the whole story, they were shocked. They always thought Emma's lifestyle was funded by her ex-husbands and that my parents were helping her by choice, not because they were drowning in debt trying to support her. They were so mad at my parents that they're now talking about cutting them out of their will. They told me they'd rather leave everything to me and my cousins, who actually work hard and don't take advantage of people. As word spread through the family, I started getting calls and messages from relatives who wanted to support me. Some said they had no idea how much I'd been dealing with and apologized for not realizing it sooner. Even my mom's sister called to say she was sorry for not noticing how differently I was treated growing up. The family was starting to fall apart, with everyone picking sides, and my parents weren't handling it well. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. My parents kept leaving angry, bitter messages and then switching to tearful pleas. They were mad that I was ruining their reputation in the family. At one point, They said I was destroying Emma's kids' lives and that I'd regret this decision someday. Then they'd beg me to reconsider, saying stuff like, "We're family, and family helps each other." All of this has left me feeling completely drained. Part of me feels guilty because I was always taught that family comes first, and it's hard to shake that mindset. But another part of me is just tired of trying to earn approval from people who only seem to care when it's convenient for them. It hurts to realize that, but I know if I give in now, I'll just be stuck putting Emma's needs before my own for years to come. So here I am, asking Reddit for advice because I honestly don't know what to do. Should I stick to my boundaries even though it's tough because it's the best thing for me? Or is there some middle ground I'm missing? I could really use some unbiased opinions on this whole situation. Update 1. Things with my parents and sister have gotten way worse than I ever thought possible. Just a couple of days after I told my grandparents everything, they actually went ahead and changed their will, cutting my parents out of it. They even called their lawyer right away to make it official. My grandparents are usually the type to avoid drama and keep things peaceful, so this was completely out of character for them. But I guess years of my parents favoring my sister, Emma, was the last straw for them. They didn't stop there, though. My grandparents also set up a family meeting over a video call so everyone, including me, could join in. They wanted to make sure everyone understood what was going on, and from the way they were talking, it sounded like they were going to drop some bombshells. The call included a bunch of relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, basically anyone who might be impacted by all this. Right from the start, my grandparents got straight to the point. They revealed that over the years, they've been sending my parents a lot of money, over $200,000, to help both me and Emma with things like school and future plans. They thought the money was being split evenly between us. I was stunned. I'd been working my way through college with scholarships, loans, and part-time jobs, barely keeping my head above water, while Emma seemed to breeze through life without lifting a finger, always getting bailed out of her mistakes. All that time, I had no idea my grandparents were sending money that was supposed to help me too. Turns out my parents had been using almost all of it for Emma, paying for her failed marriages, rent, and who knows what else. My grandparents were livid. They felt completely betrayed because they trusted my parents to use the money to support both of us equally. They demanded my parents give them a full breakdown of how every dollar was spent, and they even threatened to get lawyers involved if my parents didn't cooperate. For a family that usually keeps things private, this was a huge deal, but it was clear my grandparents had reached their breaking point. On top of all that, they announced they're setting up trust funds for all the grandkids, including Emma's 6 kids. But they made sure to say that the money would be managed by an outside trustee and could only be used for specific things like education or medical expenses. It was pretty obvious they didn't want my parents or Emma anywhere near that money, which honestly felt like a huge weight off my shoulders. At least Emma's kids will have a chance at a stable future without my parents dipping into those funds for other stuff. After the family meeting, everything blew up. Relatives started reaching out to me left and right, piecing things together. It turns out this wasn't the first time my parents had taken money from family members, claiming it was for the kids or some family emergency. One aunt told me she'd lent my parents a few $1,000s when Emma's second marriage fell apart, thinking it was for something important. Another cousin mentioned that my parents had asked for money around the time I started college, saying it was to help me out, but I never saw a dime of it. Some relatives were furious, feeling like they'd been lied to about where their money went. Others were just heartbroken, saying they hadn't realized how much my parents had favored Emma over me. One cousin even showed me text messages from my parents around the time I graduated college. They told family not to come to my graduation, saying I wanted to keep it small and low-key. Meanwhile, I'd been hoping my family would show up and celebrate with me. Seeing those messages was like a punch to the gut. It hit me how much they downplayed my achievements while always making a huge deal out of Emma's. What really caught me off guard, though, was Emma reaching out to me. She sent me a bunch of long emails, each one with a different vibe. In one, she tried to act like she'd always been on my side, saying she never noticed the favoritism and thought we were close. In another, she painted herself as a victim of our parents' manipulation, claiming they'd kept her in the dark about how unfair things were. But no matter what she said, every email had one thing in common. She always found a way to ask for help during this tough time. She was trying to act like we were suddenly best friends, but it was obvious she still expected me to bail her out. It was unbelievable. Even after everything my grandparents had done to fix things, even after the whole family turned on her, Emma still managed to make it all about her and what she could get from me. It felt like I was stuck in the same old cycle, watching her try to pull the same tricks. But I was done letting her manipulate me. I wasn't going to fall back into that role. Meanwhile, my parents were on their own mission. They flooded my phone with voicemails, swinging between angry outbursts and tearful apologies. In one message, my mom accused me of destroying the family, saying I'd regret it someday when I saw how much pain I'd caused. In the next, my dad would beg me to fix things privately, saying it didn't have to be such a big deal. They even tried guilt-tripping me, saying I was putting my grandparents in a tough spot and that I needed to think about how they'd feel if the family fell apart because of all this. It was exhausting, but I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their mess. Their plan wasn't working. My grandparents were on my side, and the rest of the family was starting to see how my parents really were. Some of them even reached out to say they were proud of me for standing up for myself. My aunt called me crying, saying she was sorry for not noticing how differently my parents treated me all these years. She said she always thought I was just more independent and didn't need as much help, but now she realized I'd been pushed into that role because my parents were so focused on Emma. As more family members began to see what I'd been through, they started apologizing or sharing things they'd noticed over the years. It was a mix of relief and pain. On one hand, I was glad the truth was finally coming out and people were recognizing what I'd gone through. But on the other hand, it brought back all those old feelings of being overlooked and unimportant. All those times I wondered why my efforts didn't seem to matter. It all clicked now. But that didn't take away the years of feeling like I was never good enough. Dealing with all of this has been draining. My parents still won't take any responsibility. They're so worried about how the family looks to others that they can't see how much they've hurt me. To them, this is just another fight I should drop to keep the peace, and they're trying hard to keep it quiet. But I don't feel bad anymore for standing up for myself. I'm starting to see how important it is to set boundaries, even with family. If I back down now, it'll just mean more years of being treated like I don't matter. For the first time, I feel like I'm in charge of my own life. My grandparents have promised to step in if my parents try to push things further. They've made it clear they don't want me to feel pressured, and they've even said they'll take more steps to protect me if needed. Just knowing I'm not alone in this has made a huge difference. Now I'm left questioning what family really means. For years, I thought being a good son and brother meant putting everyone else first and ignoring my own needs. But now I see there's a line, and family shouldn't make you feel like you're only there to give or that your happiness doesn't matter. As things keep unfolding, I'm sticking to my decision, but sometimes I wonder if I should be doing more or handling this differently. I'd really appreciate any advice on how to move forward. There's still a lot to sort through, and I'm just taking it one day at a time. Update 2. A few days after my grandparents shared their big news about the will, my parents finally spoke up. Instead of saying sorry or admitting they might have gone too far, they sent a long email trying to explain every choice they'd ever made. They didn't just defend favoring my sister Emma. They basically praised it, calling it an investment because, in their eyes, Emma was always more focused on family. As for me, they labeled me as independent and career-driven, which to them meant I didn't need as much help. They even tried to justify asking me to fund Emma's life, saying it wasn't about money but about balancing things out. They thought Emma deserved the same advantages they believed I'd already had. To make it worse, they called me selfish for not wanting to share my extra money with family. And it didn't stop there. They attached a detailed list comparing everything they'd ever spent on me versus Emma. We're talking basics like food, clothes, and housing for me, and for Emma, things like her wedding, house payments, and even therapy after her divorces. They even tried to put a price on the emotional support Emma gave during her teenage years. It was so over the top that it was clear they'd been keeping track of all this for a long time, just waiting to throw it in my face. They even sent the email to the whole extended family, hoping to make me look like the bad guy. But it completely backfired. Relatives who hadn't taken sides before started reaching out to me, shocked by how ridiculous the whole thing was. Some even apologized for not realizing how much favoritism I'd been dealing with. My parents thought everyone would side with them, but instead, they just pushed people away. To make things even more complicated, my grandparents' lawyer stepped in. My grandparents had always thought the money they'd given my parents over the years was being split fairly between me and Emma for things like education and other important expenses. But now they were finding out that a lot of that money had been used for Emma's weddings and her messy relationships. The lawyer sent my parents a formal letter demanding a full breakdown of where all the money had gone. My grandparents were serious. They were ready to take legal action if necessary, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. They felt completely betrayed, and so did I. It felt like a tangled mess of lies that had been growing for years, and I'd been left completely in the dark. Then, in a strange turn of events, Emma's first ex-husband reached out to me. He's the father of her 2 oldest kids, and while we'd never been close, we'd always been polite with each other. He told me he'd heard about everything going on and wanted to share his side of the story. He revealed that my parents had pressured him into marrying Emma when she got pregnant, promising financial support as long as he went through with it. I knew their marriage had happened quickly, but I had no idea my parents had been so involved behind the scenes. Turns out, a lot of the financial support they'd given Emma actually came from the money my grandparents had given them. Money my grandparents thought was being used for both Emma's and my futures. Emma's ex even apologized, saying he regretted not standing up to my parents and letting things get so out of hand. Meanwhile, my parents realized their email wasn't having the effect they'd hoped for, so they tried to backtrack. They sent a follow-up message to everyone, claiming the first email was written in anger and shouldn't be taken too seriously. But it was hard to believe that excuse when the original email was so detailed and clearly planned out. It might as well have been an official document. Trying to take it back now just made them look even worse, and no one was buying it. Emma had been quiet for a few days after the family meeting, but then she started reaching out again. Her tone had changed from guilt-tripping to something more desperate. She sent a few emails saying she always loved me and didn't realize how differently our parents had treated us. She even tried to spin her situation, saying she never wanted to burden me but was in a tough spot with her kids. Her messages got weirder, mixing nostalgic childhood memories with reminders of how hard her life was now. 6 kids, a struggling husband, and even hints that her kids were having trouble in school because of all the stress at home. It was a lot to take in, and it just added to the chaos. I couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Emma and her kids, but at the same time, I couldn't forget everything that had happened. Emma had known for years that our parents favored her, and she'd taken full advantage of it while I was left to figure things out on my own. Now that she was in a tough spot, she expected me to come to her rescue. Her emails didn't make me mad, they just made me sad. She's my sister, and her kids have nothing to do with this, but it's not my job to fix a mess she helped create. More family members started sharing their own stories. One of my aunts reached out to apologize for never speaking up when she noticed how unfairly I was treated compared to Emma. She remembered times when my parents clearly favored Emma and ignored me, but she hadn't wanted to get involved back then. She even mentioned that she'd once offered to help me with my college applications, but my parents brushed her off, saying I had everything under control. The truth was, I was completely on my own, juggling school applications and work. My aunt said she hadn't realized how much I'd been left to handle by myself, and she felt bad for not stepping in sooner. Family group chats became super awkward. Relatives kept messaging me, asking if I needed anything or if they could help in any way. It was weird to suddenly have all these people offering support and sympathy, especially since they'd never been this involved in my life before. I appreciated their kindness, but it was a lot to take in. Part of me felt like I didn't need their help now. I'd already gotten through the toughest times on my own. I mostly just thanked them, not really sure what else to say. Even my parents' closest friends started pulling away. Some had believed my parents' side of the story, that I was a workaholic who didn't care about family, but after reading the email and hearing more details, they began to see through my parents' excuses. A few even reached out to apologize, admitting they'd been wrong to judge me. One friend mentioned that my parents had borrowed money from them, claiming it was for family needs. They'd assumed it was for something important, but now they were wondering if they'd actually been helping fund Emma's lifestyle. Despite all this, my parents kept pushing. They kept sending messages saying I owed them for everything they'd done for me, that it was my job to keep the family together, and that my refusal to help Emma was tearing the family apart. They accused me of ruining everything, damaging their reputation, and hurting Emma's kids. It was frustrating because they were acting like none of this was their fault, completely ignoring their own role in creating this mess. For now, I'm standing my ground. I won't let them guilt me into fixing problems they caused or taking responsibility for Emma's choices. It's still hard to believe this is my family, that things have gotten to the point where I have to choose between my own well-being and what they call family loyalty. It's a lot to process, and honestly, I don't know what's going to happen next. But for the first time, I feel like I'm standing up for myself and finally being heard. That at least feels like progress. Update. So, things have finally come to an end, and it's not what anyone in the family saw coming. After all the drama and secrets that came out, my grandparents decided to put their foot down. They called one last family meeting, this time with their lawyer there. It felt like things were wrapping up, but there was still a lot of tension and hurt feelings in the air. This wasn't just about talking, though. My grandparents had a plan, and they weren't waiting around. They announced that they'd not only changed their will, but were also taking steps to make sure their money and property wouldn't be misused anymore. For years, my parents had been living rent-free in a vacation home the family owned. It was supposed to be temporary, but they'd turned it into their permanent home, thinking it would eventually be theirs. Well, that's not happening anymore. My grandparents are selling the property and using the money to set up education funds for all the great-grandkids, including Emma's kids and my cousin's children. To make sure no one could mess with the money, they're also setting up a system where an outside trustee will handle annual grants for family members who want to go to college or get professional certifications. No family members will have control over it. When my parents heard this, they were really shaken up. Losing the free house was bad enough, but realizing they wouldn't get anything from my grandparents' estate in the future was a huge shock. For once, they didn't argue, they knew it wouldn't help. They just looked completely defeated, which was weird to see after years of them acting so proud and in control. My grandparents gave them 60 days to move out, no exceptions. The lawyer handed them a signed document, and they had no choice but to go along with it. In another surprising twist, my parents admitted to mishandling some education money my grandparents had given them years ago. This was a big deal, and a lot of the family was upset about it. With no other options, my parents signed an agreement to pay the money back, even though it's going to be really hard for them. They'll be moving into a small apartment and cutting back on their lifestyle big time. It's a huge change for them. They've been relying on family support for so long that I don't think they ever thought they'd have to live on a budget. As for Emma, she seems to be accepting the situation too. Her usual support system is falling apart. She can't count on my parents to help with her bills or bail her out if her husband's business struggles anymore. But instead of complaining or trying to make me feel guilty, she's finally taking steps to get her life together. She's signed up for a medical billing and coding program, which should give her a steady income and let her support her kids on her own. Her husband is working more hours at his delivery job and seems to be trying to contribute more to their finances. Emma even emailed me not to ask for money, but just for help with her resume. I agreed to look at it, since it felt like a small way to support her without encouraging her to depend on me. One of the most surprising, and honestly really touching developments has been hearing from Emma's kids. They reached out to me through their dad, Emma's first ex-husband. Apparently, my grandparents set them up with family therapy. They've been dealing with a lot of confusing feelings about the family drama and all the favoritism they grew up around. Now, with the help of a therapist, they're starting to make sense of everything. The older kids even apologized for the guilt-tripping messages they sent me when all this first blew up. They said they didn't realize how much pressure their mom was putting on me and felt bad about being used as pawns. I told them it wasn't their fault, they're just kids, and they were doing what their mom told them to do. I'm hopeful that therapy will help them see they don't have to fix the mess the adults created. Meanwhile, my parents are struggling to fully accept their new reality. They've been sending me random childhood photos with captions like, "Remember when we were a happy family?" and "Don't forget who's been there for you since the beginning." I can't tell if they're trying to make peace or just manipulate my emotions. Some messages talk about all the sacrifices they made to raise me, while others make them sound like victims who've been abandoned by everyone. They've also been telling anyone who'll listen that the family has turned against them, acting like they're innocent and just wanted to help Emma. But I think most of the family sees through it now. People are keeping their distance, and things are polite but not close. For me, this whole situation has been a huge wake-up call. I had no idea how deep the favoritism ran or how much manipulation was going on in the family. My grandparents have been amazing through all of this, strong, fair, and focused on making sure the next generation doesn't go through the same thing. They're putting safeguards in place to protect everyone, and I've gained so much respect for them. This whole experience has been tough, but it's also been necessary. It's shown me who really cares about me and who just saw me as a source of money. In the end, I'm just grateful for the people who've stuck by me. Thanks and take care.